In Chapter 4, we introduced the idea that managing risk in the context of today's healthcare reform initiatives and the efforts that communities are making to try to change what's happening in their communities to provide a better environment for healthcare and healthcare outcomes, that we're really challenging the leaders to look at managing risk from a different perspective. Traditionally, and what is generally used in most healthcare systems, whether it's Six Sigma, quality improvement, whatever you want to call it, typically healthcare organizations tend to concentrate a great deal of time and effort in working through the ideas of risk management from a perspective of what to avoid and what danger is out there that we need to be able to mitigate against so that we avoid some less than desirable or very difficult outcomes. And that sets up a mindset that in, again, most healthcare organizations, they're data-driven, the medical model, the diagnostic model, the treatment model. The treatment model is generally based upon good and clear standards of care, coupled with the idea that there are processes, pathways, if you will, clinical pathways, that are accepted standards of clinical practice that govern how we manage our patients and their conditions to ensure the best outcomes. And there's some unanticipated consequences of that particular focus. So what we want to do in this chapter, as you can see in this diagram, the dimensions of managing risk, is to look at risk from three different perspectives, what we call foundational, characteristics, and levels of prevention. Very, very quickly, the idea behind foundational is that all industries, regardless of the type, operate with at least one core or inherent risk. In financial services, that's credit. In the oil industry, it's safety and healthcare quality. And the idea is that it is so foundational to everything we do that if we do something that increases the risk or exposes a real problem, then inherently, through pardon that pun, we will undermine the value proposition of our system. So that's sort of the base. And then you move up to the next point, operational risk. It really gets to the idea of processes. How do we work patients? How do we work populations through the healthcare system to try to provide initiatives that will turn health inequalities into equalities and to provide better outcomes. And then lastly, there's this idea of market risk. Market risk is sort of interesting because that's what the population sees. And typically when populations have choices, they will exercise those choices based upon the market risk evaluation they do through their thinking. So that's one level, that's foundational. When we turn to the characteristics, this really comes from some of the former work that the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations in the United States used to use as one of their three key indicator areas for their quality improvement program. And that is those high volume events, that is what are the most things that we're doing, because that's a major part of our organizational work. Those things that we will consider high risk. In other words, we've got to be particularly careful. For example, heart transplants. Risk is much greater than a hip replacement. And so there's inherently an assessment that healthcare providers make around risk in that regard. And then those that are problem prone, meaning that generally speaking, we will tend to see that there are a lot of activities in healthcare that tend to have, just by its very nature, problems associated with it. Now, in terms of levels of prevention, what we're really talking about there, we'll sort of go in reverse order, if you will. Tertiary prevention really is about, from the medical model the concept that if a patient has a chronic illness that's not going to get better, in other words, you can predictably estimate when the final outcome is going to take place. It's not going to be a good outcome. And so basically all we're doing in tertiary levels of prevention is trying to provide comfort and not necessarily healing. If we want to come upstream a bit, we come to secondary prevention, and the idea here really is that through early detection and treatment, we might be able to get patients or patient populations into a system that prevents them from automatically moving into the tertiary level of prevention. And then primary is what this idea around there are inherently some populations within subsets of populations that are going to be more likely to have problems. And those are the people we really want to target our healthcare reform activities in this idea of health promotion and prevention. So that's sort of the big model. We're going to work through quickly the rest of the concepts because we don't want this video to be too terribly long. Next, how do you put it all together? Well, basically, what we say is we use the idea of coming from our efforts to do community health data needs assessments using a fishbone diagram, as you can sort of see here, to then translate that into what we would call the high-value community health needs. And the idea here is that we sort of want to take a look at, if we look at our community, what's the profile look like? What are those areas that we think we can have the greatest impact? And to begin centering on those in order to work through the next part of our model. And then the next part is to, through scenario planning that we introduced in another chapter, take a look at the best risk return from a strategic initiative. And what I mean by that is we want to avoid opportunity costs. And that's the difference in what we're talking about in this particular concept. And the idea is that if we automatically assume that coronary heart disease or chronic heart conditions, for those patients that it's just merely a waste of money to do anything other than treatment, may not be the right kind of thinking. So we want to change our thinking and to promote more investment of funding for prevention, early detection and treatment, identify those subsets of our population in an effort to try to avoid getting them into this tertiary level of care. So that's the concept here. And the idea is that we want to find, as we say, the best healthcare reform initiative for any given community based upon the risk profile and the benefit return. And the idea here is to move from what we will call working towards the probable, in other words, this is the probable kind of outcome, to what is the possible. And that's putting it to a higher level and more of a stretch responsibility. I won't go into detail, but this matrix is important because when you start developing those analyses with your teams, you're going to begin seeing where some of the initiatives that you are looking at might be both a major risk, but also a higher probability. And so what you really want to do is take a look at 2 or 3 areas of focus and begin assessing where do we get the best return for our investments and at what level of prevention, what kinds of characteristics are we going to see in the process, and so forth and so on. So that's sort of I won't go into detail because the book does that for you. So the whole idea behind managing risk is to move from what we call the probable and work towards transforming the impossible to the possible. And that's going to require a great deal of creative or lateral thinking, as well as critical thinking, and that's vertical thinking, to begin really defining and working down towards what we want to eventually achieve is a healthcare reform initiative effort that's based upon a very clear vision, substantive values, realistic goals with measurable returns on our investment. That's very critical. So you will see in the book, we introduced the idea of benchmark testing as one, and indicators of performance that really help us to define how to measure the actual performance of execution on the goals that we're pursuing. And the bottom line is obviously that we want to focus in on excellence. That's the ultimate goal with what we're trying to achieve. I hope that's helped. We put things in context. We encourage you to look in great detail at the chapter, play with it, work with your teams, and don't be afraid to you're going to make some mistakes, but that's the way life is. And as a leader, your principal goal is to use this kind of thinking as a way to instill and motivate your teams to constantly be aware of what are the learning opportunities we have. And I think you will find if you do that, that over a period of months, you're going to find that what might start out as sort of a slow, gradual effort can really accelerate rapidly and move towards a very, very good outcome in terms of the work you're doing. That's it. We hope it works for you, and please do your own thinking and adapt this model to your best needs.